Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Lenette Serlo. Thank you for joining us today, Lenette. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. It's going to be a blast.
Thank you, Simon. I'm thrilled to be here with you today.
Yeah, thrilled. That's a great word, isn't it? Me too. Thrilled. We could all do a little bit more thrill in our life, can we? Um, so, listeners, I've said this before, right? We already have people with huge hearts on this show, but huge hearts and so much modesty about the size of their hearts. So Lynette's got four kiddos through adoption, and she also how she manages time to raise four kids and run a non-profit that's growing at some incredible speed. So she's the founder and CEO of Generation O, which is for a national organization in the States for opioid exposed kids. So I don't know. How do you do it all? How do you do it all? I tell you one thing for nothing before she answers her own question. Perhaps I should be not interrupting. Um, she does it by she told me that she's been walking for the last couple of days, and that's the first time she's been walking for a long time. I get the feeling for. So I think she does, some of it by maybe edging some of her own self-care stuff out, perhaps. Lynette, would that be about right?
Yes, I don't think that you can put raising for interesting children and birthing an organization and self-care in the same bucket.
Yeah,
I'd
yeah,
love to think that there's a rhythm to be able to do them all, and I try to do them all because I know without the self-care, everything else suffers. But it's a challenge. It's a challenge. My four children were all born with prenatal substance exposure. We adopted each of them individually and brought them home from the hospital, my husband and I. And what a journey it's been. Three of them are now teenagers. One's off on her own in college. She's 19. And then I've got two in 10th grade that are 16 and 17. And then we've got a little bonus guy who's 6. So he still keeps us grounded in all things 6-year-old boy.
yeah, yeah. Well, yesterday I did a interview and it was called Grounded, right? So, what grounds you, Lynette?
Mm. I think that everything that's constantly happening in my life keeps me grounded um, because I have to. I don't know that I prefer to stay grounded. I mean, my nervous system would have me keep busy. Um, but when the 6-year-old walks in and needs you to cook them an egg, you got to stop and cook them an egg. So it's the interaction with the children and um, that's a big part of it. I've lived a lot of life and I've understood that when I don't stay grounded, bad things happen. So I do my best to, keep what's in front of me important and, stay busy with important things. Um, the work I'm doing with Generation O is very grounding because I know it's such important work to help people understand what these opioid exposed children are dealing with in their lives. Um, and so it's moment by moment.
Yeah, yeah. Our nervous systems, like nervous systems, keeping us busy, like a high wire act. I don't know. How does it feel for you?
Well, my nervous system is all over the place, and but what I know more about perhaps than my own nervous system is the nervous system of these kids. Because what's happening to them is when opioids are part of their fetal development, there's some changes taking place. There's changes in their brain, there's changes in the structure and function of what's going on in their brains and bodies. And when they're born, their nervous system may be different than a child who wasn't exposed to these substances. And a lot of people, with the opioid epidemic in the US, a lot of people have heard about how these babies are born, and then when the umbilical cord is separated and those opioids are no longer flowing into these tiny bodies, they have to go through this withdrawal. And that's a heart-wrenching thing to watch. But when the withdrawal is done, they're still left with that miswired nervous system. And now we have the next 18 years of childhood that they need developmental surveillance and support. And that's this huge gap that the team that I'm working with sees and really wants to help fill in.
Yeah. Uh, and yet, with all that background, you'd think a 19-year-old with that sort of start wouldn't be at college, right?
Yep, and I can tell you there were many years when I never thought she was going to launch. I didn't see it. And this particular child and I, our personalities are so different, and we've really struggled. Um, and when I would see her as a 10-year-old or a 13-year-old and think, how in the heck is she ever going to get through school and get on with her life and launch? And I need her to launch because we need to be living in separate places. Um, but it's happened. It's happened, and she launched. She fell flat on her face. Excuse me, she fell flat on her face, and she got right back up, and she's doing amazing, Simon. We are so proud of what she's doing, and she's following her own path. And it's not a path that we could see clearly for quite a while. But she's figured out for her what works and what she needs, and we're still supporting her. Um, you know, this is a piece of the dysregulation, but her maturity is not at 19. Her maturity is maybe at 13, 14. And I didn't realize this until it happened, but I've started to say that it's like sending a middle school kid, which I don't know what you guys call middle school, the ages when you're like 8, 10, 12, like that age range. It's like sending someone that age range off to college. And not only off to college, but we live in Florida and her college is in Ohio. That's a significant distance. That's an airplane ride away. And we did this, and it's no um surprised that she fell flat on her face, but it's exactly what she needed. And now she's doing amazing.
So, I didn't ask you the question, right? Thriving adoptees, that's what you're talking about, is it? Is that
Yeah, I would say she is currently thriving. And it's a different picture than what would be thriving to me. Thriving to her is very different. But she's doing it. And, you know, a huge piece of that was understanding who she was and supporting that person, not trying to support the person who I think that she should be.
yeah. So I was talking to an adoptive mum a couple of weeks ago, and this was I can't remember whether it was part of the interview or afterwards. And w- I, I've got this I've got this thing. I see this thing so clearly, and the thing that I see is our fundamental wholeness underneath our trauma. Nobody's denying the trauma. I'm just saying, underneath the trauma, maybe behind the trauma, we're whole. Right? This is what Richard Schwartz of Internal Family Systems would call the uppercase S, self. What other people might call consciousness or awareness. It's what's not touched by the SH1T that we go through. And this this mum said, yeah, this is kind of new to me. I said, well, yeah, it's new, you know, this wholeness. We've been trauma aware, and we should be, and trauma informed. And we need to be trauma informed. We need to be trauma aware, but we also need to be wholeness aware. In my opinion, because seeing my wholeness is what's changed the metaphor I live for life. Where the metaphor I live from, the way I live, seeing my wholeness and feeling my wholeness. And she said, "Well, my my daughter's trauma was uh, pre-birth." And I said, "Yeah, yeah." And I said, "She's so she talked about behavior issues and stuff like that." And I said, "So i- is she ever at peace then?" Uh, and this lady said, "Yeah, yes, yeah." And I said, "Well, that's who she is." And I went on to say, "Well, you know, if somebody that if somebody that's born if you're born blind, right? You're always blind. You don't have moments of sight and moments that it doesn't come and go." And so I'm thinking with this. It's a very long answer, long way to wind up to a question, but how do you see all that? How do you see the what the peace and the moments of regulation and dysregulation, and uh, how do you see the intermittency of that, and how does that play out for kids who are opioid exposed?
I like that question because it really is important when we're talking about kids who were born with a certain challenge because of the exposure, but that doesn't identify them. What identifies them is what you're talking about, who they are and their wholeness. And I think the trauma informed care is a really important piece of that because the trauma informed teachings allow us to see that this behavior is not who they are. It's just a form of communication. And I can tell you with my oldest opioid exposed son, his name is Johnny. Um, when he was born, um, the doctor, he went through his 10-day withdrawal at the hospital, and the doctor gave us our brand new baby boy and said, "Here you go. He's through his withdrawal. There's nothing more to see here. Raise him up like a normal child." And we did. We didn't know any better. And it wasn't until he was 5, 6, 7 years old that we started to see things that made me think, maybe this kid needs a little bit more support than a typical child. And that's when I started to learn about trauma informed care. And that's when I started to learn to parent differently. And until I was able to do that, all I saw when I was parenting like a typical parent, all I saw was that I gave an order, he didn't follow it. He must be bad. There must be something wrong with him. What are, you know, that's what we're taught, that the cause and effect. But once I was able to see that his own trauma had gotten in the way and his own wiring and dysregulation had gotten in the way, and it wasn't that he didn't want to follow the command, he couldn't follow the command. He needed more skills, he needed more understanding. And that process of parenting him normally to understanding trauma informed care and beginning to parent him differently took years. And if there's two parents, like in my husband and I's case, there was two parents, one of us is going to be catching on and refining their parenting a lot quicker than the other one. The fact that both of you would be doing it at the same time would just be a miracle. And so, I'm starting to parent him different. I'm starting to see who he is underneath. And my husband is still trying to hammer him down with, this is how my husband and I were both raised. The authoritarian voice says something, the subordinate person follows it. And he still kept trying even when it wasn't working until he eventually saw the light. But having to go through this process for me is what it took to be able to see he's not going to be someone different. He is who he is. His wholeness is underneath that dysregulation. And now that I can see it, man, this is the best dirt bike rider that I know. He's an amazing wrestler. He's a good driver. Um, he is so generous and responsible. He's got this magnetic personality. Wherever we take him, whenever we go on vacation, everyone at the resort knows this kid and loves this kid. We look different than him. He's mixed race and we're white, and people will not realize we're his parents and start talking about this amazing kid. We're like, yeah, 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 that's our Johnny. That's our kid. And he's got so much that is his wholeness. And now that I see that, I can support it. And his wholeness needs more educational supports. And his wholeness needs a place to release all that pent up energy. But it's still his wholeness.
Yeah. And does he see it?
Not yet. I mean, I think he does to a certain extent because he's got that 16-year-old boy Machado, like he can see some of it. Um, but in the school system, he's constantly presented with things that are very difficult for them. And even when he tries his hardest, he doesn't succeed. And so there's a lot of doubt that creeps in there. I think we finally convinced him that he's intelligent, even though he may not be able to score well on a school test, to try and explain that difference to him. Um, and I hope that he will stay open to learning more as he grows. But, you know, uh, not he doesn't understand it in as broad of a sense that Dad and I do.
Because
He's
until
he's
we,
gonna have to follow his own path, just like you have, Simon, right? He's gonna have
well,
to
we all
follow his
have
own
to,
path to like get, yeah.
and until until we see our own light.
Yeah. I mean, luckily he's got this internal light that other people can see and that for him can buoy him for a little while. Um, but my other opioid exposed son, he doesn't have that same magnetic personality, you know, and so I think it might be a little bit different for him because he doesn't have people buoying him on in the same way. He doesn't walk into a room and light it up, whereas my older one does, and that's just part of his personality.
Yeah. How do we get? Because me and my wife haven't got any kids, right? So how do we get kids to see their own strengths?
I don't know that I know the answer to that question. And I think I've struggled to see my own strengths. And so I'm thinking from a parenting perspective, you know, if you're someone who struggles with seeing your own strength, it might make it harder to help your children to see their strengths. Now, my husband doesn't struggle to see his strengths. He thinks he's the best thing since
Yeah.
sliced bread, and he's been able to communicate to that to the kids. So
Did you? Because I don't know whether this is a British thing or or it travels across the pond. When I was growing up, the idea of loving yourself was the pride that comes before the fall. You know, you love yourself. That's a criticism. Is loving yourself seen as a criticism in the States like it is in the UK?
I think it's changed a bit because I remember
I hope so.
growing up. Yeah, yeah.
I hope
It
so.
needs to. It needs to. I remember growing up that I remember my mom in the 70s going through like trying to love herself and it being a new concept. Like we had never thought about that before. Um I think there's a lot in today's youth that allows them to love themselves, but that's a tough one because then you have the pride. There's a balance there.
Think they've got um I hear this. I hear this and I see it. Uh, so we were on holiday and a friend's child wouldn't go 18, 19 at college, you know, like your eldest, um, couldn't go into a bar with us. And she said, I'd have to be uh, off my head on booze to go into there.
Mm.
And this really kind of brought it home for me, this um, the fragility,
Yeah.
the emotional fragility of uh, of kids that we read about all the time, and the mental health stuff that we hear about all the time, the statistics, the social media, and that, but that one example of that, and and then it scared the bejesus out of me, really.
It's it reminds me of the social anxiety that we hear about with these kids a lot. And all of my kids have some level and some type of anxiety. And the opioid exposed children as a population deal with a high level of anxiety. And it might not always be social anxiety. Like I don't think that my oldest son has social anxiety, but he has anxiety about other things at a level that's it's just different than his peers. And we've seen studies that anxiety in children has gotten higher um, recently. But I think within the population of opioid exposed children, it's part of their makeup. It's part of the reprogramming that's happening when those opioids are combined with the fetus. And, you know, supporting that anxiety and understanding what it is um, makes all the difference between allowing these kids to thrive and making them feel even worse about
Yeah,
themselves.
yeah. Have you seen the movie The French Connection?
I have not.
So it's Gene Hackman movie from the 70s, and he's a cop in New York, uh, and he's investigating heroin, and he finds himself in Marseille, and they the baddies, who are the drug dealers, capture him and make make inject heroin, so he has to then come off it. You see him going through the cold turkey. It's incredible. It's an incredible film. Um, and I also so it's well worth a watch. I read a book by a British author, a guy called Ben Ben Timberlake. Uh, it's an incredible book. So the guy is an adrenaline junkie who becomes a junkie,
Mm,
and he decides he decides it's just so nuts. He decides to try heroin for 2 weeks to
okay.
to see what it's like coming off it. 5 years later,
Oh,
he's sunk further and further down and become sunk down lower and lower and lower, and then he hits rock bottom, and he he's and then he hits rock bottom and he bounces back up, and his bounce back up is based on an insight that he has, and he shares it in one sentence, and he says, and then I realized that I was bigger than my addiction.
mm,
And that thought landed so profoundly for him, it was the start of his turnaround.
mm.
And he doesn't
I,
explain anything more about, so that's an epiphany. That's, you talked about your husband seeing the light, right? That there we are, and it's in one sentence. But obviously
yeah.
I can't convey the import of it to you. I can't, it was it was his epiphany, right? And second-hand epiphanies don't seem to make they don't,
No.
you know, like
No, there was
yeah,
I've been talking to a group of women who are in their 30s and 40s, and they were all born um and they were all exposed to opioids in utero and were born and had the withdrawal, and now they're in their 30s and 40s, and we're talking about what their experience has been like in life, and what they're dealing with now. They have some unusual medical conditions and things. Um, but one of them had said that she works in the foster care system, and she was with a young, teenager, and he had been addicted to some substance and, had gotten clean, and she was taking him back somewhere, and he's like, I always just want more. I can't imagine ever feeling fulfilled. I just always want more. And I think that's a similar feeling to an adrenaline junkie. And I notice with my sons, the sensory processing system is one of the things that we find is very different in these kids. It's just so dysregulated. Noises might seem louder or softer, or they have, it's called sensory seeking, when they just want more. And it's because the normal amount of light or softness or whatever is not enough for them. They need more. And so it's very similar to an adrenaline junkie, because my oldest, you know, he always is wanting to ride faster, or roll on the ground more times, or jump off a higher platform, or do two flips instead of one flip. Well, what's happened is that, we're not letting him do wild, crazy, unsafe things. We're just giving him the opportunity to be a normal kid. Simon, he's already gotten 7 concussions in his life because his system needs so much more stimulation. And so he's always doing things that put him in situations where he was 3 years old and he was sitting on a fence and he fell off and hit his head, but he had climbed up on that fence over and over and over again because he needs that stimulation. And so that's one of my big worries about these kids is, they have that same thing in them, that intensity that needs to be filled. And how can we support that as their parents so that we can direct them into good ways to do that instead of deciding to try heroin for 2 weeks. Because that's what they're going to want, if they can't figure out how to fulfill that inner need that's part of them by, I mentioned my son's a dirt bike rider, participating in those races and those practices gives him that outlet. But if I didn't allow him to do that, then someone at some point in his life is going to offer him heroin or pot or whatever it is, and he's going to say, "Yeah, great, let me try it." And you know what? It's going to feel really good because his system is already set up to crave that.
I interviewed a young adoptee, probably in his early 20s, yesterday. Um, and he said the opposite of addiction is connection.
Yes.
It blew me away. Blew me away. Um, I I talked to an adoptee in Atlanta this morning, and he said he listens to the show, and he was saying that it helped him a lot, and he was talking about he was talking about his birth mum, and he said he was talking about anger, and he'd listened to a bit about my story in anger, and I said to him, well, he was talking about anger, and I said, well, you're you were your you meant the world, you were the world to your birth mother, right? Um, and now I can see it's even bigger than that, right? You were her universe, her universe. You are the universe to her. And so you're infinite. And how can the infinite be insufficient?
Mm,
And it just floored him in a really good way.
yeah.
And that how can the infinite be insufficient, right? So why do we go? Why do we go doom scrolling, getting addicted to dirt biking? Well, I don't know. Why do we get yeah, there's why do we get addicted to anything? Why do we, people retail therapy, right? Oh, I need some retail therapy, right? Okay. Um, and me and watches. I've got a bit of an addiction thing going on with watches at the moment. Just got a new one as well today. It's really cool.
Hey, that's a pretty safe
That's a pretty
addiction.
cool watch. Um, and I, from our infinity, we're enough. We're not looking. We're we're expressing our infinity with the world. We're not seeking validity or an end to our boredom or
But do we feel that? And I think that's the wholeness. The infinite is the wholeness that's below all of this. But if we can't access it,
well,
then we
we
don't
are
have
it.
the connection.
We are it.
We are, but not all of us can feel it. We
Well,
can't,
we haven't
we,
seen it. Like we have to see it first.
yeah. And how do you
So we
see it?
feel
Through
it.
connection.
You see it. We see it through connection. We see it through sufficiency. We see it through peace. We see it like I was asking you that question about how do we ask our kids to see their strengths. I think where you were going with it before I probably side railed you into a different answer. Um, is like, well, we have to see it for we have to see it for ourselves. And when I came, and I mentioned this recently on a podcast. Sorry, listeners, if I had. Um, I was talking to an adoptee who has adopted, and the name escapes me just at the moment. Maybe it'll come back to me. Uh, and she was talking about she got three kids, I think, two bio kids, and then adopted a daughter. Daughter was like 8 or 9, and she was talking about how to get her how to help her daughter, her adopted daughter, see her own self-worth. And we went back and forth on it for a time, and then I said something, and then the penny dropped for this adoptive mum that I was talking to, who is also an adoptee, and it was about her her seeing her own self-worth. And so that's the first phase, I think, for me. We have to see it for ourselves first, and then we have to develop the skill of pointing.
Mm.
So it's a bit like learning to dirt bike ride, I would imagine, right? Or become a dirt bike ride trainer. I can't. I'm not a dirt biker. I'm absolutely terrible on motorbikes. I'm not coordinated, and I would just fall off. I rode on one as a 10-year-old and went straight through his mum's flower bed
Oh no.
and knocked a, chopped a bush in half, and then went over the handlebars as I went over a 3 foot drop, right?
Ugh.
Um, so I'll go with the skiing one, right? So to be a good skiing instructor, you've got to be a good skier, and then you've got to become a good instructor.
Mm-hmm.
It's both.
Yep.
It's both. It's about being able to. We can't we can't share what we haven't got ourselves, and we can't we can't point out to others what we haven't seen within ourselves. So you spot
Yeah.
on with that, seeing our strengths for ourselves without falling into the pride
Yeah.
trap. So
Yeah. And
so it's not just it's not just me that's the infinite that can't be insufficient. It's not just you that's the infinite that can't be insufficient. It's not just Johnny that's the infinite that can't be insufficient. It's all of us. So it's not about specialness. It's not about difference. It's about everyone. I mean, how many infinities can there be?
yeah.
Mathematically, there are loads apparently, just to really fry your brain.
Don't bring math into the
Don't bring
conversation.
math into the conversation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, um, I can see that in my own story that, my own struggle to see my own self-worth is impacted my ability to show my children their self-worth.
But you've got wise
Um,
to it.
yeah, yeah, I'm working on it. I'm getting better, and they got dad, and dad doesn't have that struggle. So between the two of us, you know, they are getting pointed in the right direction. They are able to, whether they're at a point that they can hear it yet, that they can hear that they have these amazing, wonderful strengths. Um, going through it with the 6 year
Um,
old, because we're kind of like second time parents now. I feel like we're doing a little bit of grandparenting and parenting at the same time for this younger child. And he's getting a different experience because we've done this before. We've both grown. Um, and I think that he's um, a little bit more aware of his strengths.
The lady that I interviewed yesterday, Jamie, she's got 8 kids. Um, and I was thinking to myself, well, you've had plenty of times to you've had 8 chances to perfect, right? I think they used to say that the average number of kids in the UK household is 1.6, right? And she's on 8, so she's on more than 4 times that. She's had the opportunity to learn and to hone her pointing skills, I guess.
Well, and um that's very it's on point because Generation O is an organization of over 8,000 parents raising opioid exposed kids. And, you know, it's the knowledge of this worldwide group. They're mostly US, but I think we're about 9% outside of the US, in other English speaking countries in our group. And we're all raising these children together. And since there's no guidance yet on what to do with opioid exposed children, like what will we see emerge long term in their lifetimes and how do we support them? We're doing it together. And so it's not just one or two parents that have an experience raising one or two kids. It's 8,000 parents raising over 8,000 kids, pooling our resources together and trying to guide this whole new generation of children.
Yeah. So that's back to the connection piece.
And so there's connection in all of us working together for this common goal. And there's what might be neat. Well, another piece of the connection is us parents getting to do this together because parenting a child with a special need like this can be so isolating. And the fact that we have this group of us, even though it's virtual, um, it gives us that connection to do it together.
Yeah. So going back to the kind of idea of thriving, um, how do what does thriving mean to you as a human being? So as big as you like, right? So I'm not thriving to you as an adoptive mum, not thriving to you as a wife, not about thriving to you a founder and a CEO of a global non-profit, but you as a human being. What does thriving mean to you?
It's something in the line of, doing the best that you can with what you have kind of thing. I have been blessed that I have this personality type where I'm always trying to uncover how can I improve. I realize everyone doesn't have that, but I constantly want to improve who I am, how I do things, how I help the world, how I improve things. And so it's something that I'm continuously thinking at and working on. And so there's thriving in that because you can't always see all the things that need to get better, but when you can and you're able to do something about it, or you can find the supports to do something about it, then you're on that thriving path. And that would look different to everyone. But it's an awareness of being able to see where improvement can happen, and then being willing to look at that improvement and strive towards it.
Can be really tiring though, right?
Exhausting. Yes. I'm a 9 hours a night sleep person. I don't do well with much less than that. And I know that that's not a luxury everyone gets. But I'm early to bed, early to rise. It's part of my formula.
Yeah. I had this, I was on a personal development, personal acceptance, you know, good stuff kind of weekend. And I, I need my, I'm better with a lot of sleep too. Um, and I sleep a lot better in my own bed. And if sometimes if I've a few pints or some wine or whatever, then it interrupts my sleep, and the combination of those two can be really tricky. So being in not in my own bed, being in a hotel bed or a Airbnb bed, and having had a booze will both combine. But so I felt terrible in the morning. But then it was such great content, right? We were having such a
Mm,
great time with the fun stuff that we're doing on the Sunday morning. I kind of forgot I was tired,
mm,
and then then the next thing that occurred to me was sometimes fatigue isn't physical. I how can I have forgotten my I've forgotten why am I'm so involved. And I've totally forgotten that I only got 3 hours kip last night, and it wasn't very good kip. A kip sleep. Sorry, does that translate? Yeah, okay. Um, and I thought, what if energy isn't physical, or isn't not just physical, right? Because so there's this idea, right? I used so at that time I was doing a different thing, running a different business. And when I wasn't sleeping, when I was in my own bed and I hadn't had any drink and I was still waking up early and thinking about business and how I was gonna improve it, right? And how I was gonna avoid disaster and improve it.
mm.
Both of those two things. Um, then I used to get really worried about my lack of sleep because I thought, well, no, I need my sleep to be able to do what I need to do. Um, so then I get kind of I get worried about a lack of sleep, and then I get worried about worrying, and I would become what a mentor of mine, Michael Neal, says. I become a moron, right? I had a moron my mind. How do you see the
Um,
that?
it's I think you're absolutely right. I think that you know, there's so many types of energy. Uh, you and I are in across the pond from each other on a Zoom call. We're exchanging energy, you know, and we're beings of energy, right? And sometimes when my husband and I are going through a difficult time, and I can't quite figure out like what's the right conversation we can have to get us back on track, or what's something we can do because I don't like living with this how it feels. Inevitably, something will happen. A child will need something, an email will come through, and we've all experienced that. You're just opening up your email for the day, or you're looking at your text for the day, and all of a sudden you read something, your energy completely changes in that second. You're either filled with energy or your energy just sinks. and it's about something you've just seen or read. And so, yeah, I mean, we know scientifically that our bodies need to sleep, and each body might need a little bit less or more than each other, but that's not the only type of energy. You're right on there. There's all of the other energies in the world that are combining to have us live out our day. And the sleep piece, I hate to mention sleep without coming back to these poor I shouldn't say poor, these specific opioid exposed children and what they're tasked with. Many of their bodies can't sleep. They really struggle to sleep. Their sleep wake cycles are mixed up. Um, and it just, if you can't get if your body can't get the amount of sleep it needs, and you can't have that baseline energy to start with, it's going to affect everything. um and maybe there's nothing that can be done. Like, back to Johnny, he hasn't slept well in 16 years of his life, but he's managing to grow and become taller than mom and go out there and do all the things that he has to do in life. And, he's getting energy from his friends. He's getting energy from the sun. Who knows how it all happens, but he's found a path.
Yeah. It it's like one of the challenges we were talking earlier on about the fragility of teenagers' mental health, to put it in four words. Um, and at the start of the conversation, you said, well, our kids aren't we're not our trauma. They're not they're not their addiction. They're not their prenatal. They're not their labels, right? Like there's a there's kind of a relief at diagnosis. So for me, I'm talking personally, right? So there's a relief, a relief reading the primal wound, right? And then the relief morphed into doom. I'm stuck with this. So diagnosis became identity. And then I saw that that was wrong. And there's a danger with all these labels that and making the labels wrong, that we can be really that can debilitate us. I like this thingification thing. So uh, the making something dangerous, making something a thing, making a label as a dangerous as an identity, it can become, I don't know the word paralyzing, but it can detract. And I was thinking about social anxiety versus being shy.
Yes. All the time I think about that. I grew up shy and I was just a shy kid. I didn't get the label of social anxiety. And
But
what would it have been like if someone told me that?
and shyness comes and goes.
The
But
social anxiety come and go?
well, yeah, well, kind of, it's a thing. It's a thing. Well, it's not a thing. We call it a thing. So the same guy, Michael O'Neill, Michael O'Neill, the moron guy, right? Moron our mind, right? He
Hmm.
says, if you can't put it, if you can't put it into a wheelbarrow, it's not a thing.
Mm,
Shyness is a behavior, is a feeling. Behaviors change. Sometimes you're shy, sometimes you're not. Feelings change. Sometimes you feel shy, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you feel very outgoing. So maybe we just got to be a bit more careful about this thingification. He calls it Michael Neal's made it a thing, right? So he calls it premature thingification.
mm.
How it's become a
You're right,
thing.
because when you give someone that label social anxiety, then what do you do with it? Do you medicate it? It's a whole thing. And I
Well,
don't know that we're giving it the chance
there
to
there
to
are
just dissipate.
yeah there are therapists in the States. There is a certain type of therapist that all they do is prescribe. That's all they are qualified to do. They are qualified to prescribe, and that's all they can do. They can't do, we were talking about somatic therapy and stuff like that before we hit record. Obviously, there's talk therapy and these different modalities. They can't do any of that. All they can do is prescribe.
Yeah, I think you're thinking about a psychiatrist.
Sorry, psychiatrist. Yeah, sorry, yeah. There's two sorts of psychiatrists. There's the ones that one type of them. That's all they can do is prescribe.
Yep,
Isn't that really dangerous?
I think so. I think so. I mean, and especially with kids, right? Should we understand the child and what things are like from their perspective? Um, can we support them? I mean, sometimes medication is the right answer,
Yeah.
but I don't know that we always look at all the other
No, no.
options.
But we've got a or you've got a and we're talking about opioid stuff here, right?
Yeah.
We've seen I've
We have a
seen the film
prescription problem. Huge one, right? The US has a huge prescription problem.
because the
Opioids being
system
just one of them.
because
Hmm.
what one group within that system that's all they can do.
Yep. Yeah, I see that.
Change the energy and bring us home with something a bit more upbeat. We can't finish
Ah,
that.
yes, because Simon, we can't solve all of the world's problems. There's so many. I have been involved in the adoption world since adopting my first child, almost 20 years ago. And I shouldn't say that. I was involved in the adoption world before that because all of my cousins are adopted. My aunts and uncles adopted kids, and so I grew up with cousins who were adopted, and they were my cousins. They weren't my adopted cousins; they were my cousins. Um, and then we adopted our own family, and it's taken me down roads that I never expected to go down. But what a journey it's been. And at this point, by creating Generation O, um, by being a voice for the caregivers who are raising these opioid exposed children, we are inviting everyone into our community who is part of this this journey of raising opioid exposed children.
Yeah,
We recognize that they have their own constellation of challenges, and we want them to be on the journey with us because it's too hard to do alone. And we want to discover right along with everyone else what's best for these kids and how we can support them. It just so happens that most of the people in our community are raising children who have been adopted or are in foster care or are in kinship care, family care. Um, and so it ties right into the work that you're doing.
Yeah, and I think you told me last time like just over half of of your 8,000 families
You're
are kids are adopted kids have
Yep,
adopted
that's true.
children. Yeah, just over half.
Yep.
So it's huge. I haven't asked this for a while. What do you think we should call this interview, this episode? You know, I have a little. I give each episode a little title.
I was actually, when we were talking about connection, I was thinking about connection. Um, you may have to go back and listen to the episode and see. But I like the word connection. Um, it's I also like that for people specifically searching for resources for opioid exposed children, I like them to be able to find stuff like this. Um, but hopefully this episode is good for your entire audience.
Yeah,
We talked a lot of things that are more global than just
yeah,
opioid exposed children.
yeah. Cool. Thank you, Lynette. Thank you, listeners. We'll speak to you again very soon. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.